Hello crafters, this is Yana Smakula for SimonsSTM.com. Welcome back for another Yippee For Yana episode. In today's video, I'm going to share some of my favorite Copic marker color combinations while making a fall thank you card. Now I also have a bonus project for you at the end of this video, so make sure you watch until the very end. I'm creating with all leaves cling background stamp today. It is a 6x6 red rubber stamp featuring a pattern of leaves, perfect for fall crafting. And I feel like I'm all about fall and maybe even Halloween crafting these days. Not to mention Christmas crafting, of course. I have a sheet of Simon's 120-pound cardstock. I love using this paper lately for nearly all of my crafting, and I'll use it today for coloring and ink blending. I've placed the paper inside my MISTI stamping tool. You will need a MISTI or another stamp positioner to be able to replicate the technique I'll use for this card. I plan to stamp the background in black Copic marker friendly ink, color the background with Copic markers, and then re-stamp the same image over my coloring and heat emboss it in gold embossing powder, so that's where you need the MISTI or a similar stamp positioner. Now, you could heat emboss your background right away, but coloring with Copic markers over a heat embossed image can potentially damage the tips of your markers, especially if you're not careful. So best, if you have a MISTI, to do this workaround instead. I stamped the image in Memento Tuxedo Black ink. The impression wasn't perfect, but I didn't need it to be perfect. I just needed it to be good enough for me to see where to do my coloring. Now, please know that you need to keep the stamp in the MISTI. Do not remove it from the lid of the MISTI. Do not reposition it, or you won't be able to heat emboss the image in the exact spot. So keep the stamp in the MISTI as is. Since this is a fall background, I have picked several fall colors for this card: red, pink, yellow, orange, and green. And I have 3 to 4 markers in each color family. These are my go-to colors and also the colors that blend well and work well together. I'm going to show you each of these combos in action as I color some of the leaves on this background. So let's start with the green leaf. My lightest color is YG01, although I also like to use YG00 for even lighter green. I'm using this color to coat the entire leaf and saturate the paper. Next, I come in with my medium color, YG03. This is another one that I use nearly every time I color with Copics. In this case, this is a medium color. But if I go for a darker green, I then use this as my lightest color, and then I proceed with YG17 as a medium. Here, I'm using YG17 as the darkest color. Again, if I wanted this green combo to be darker, I would then add YG67 on top to intensify the shadows. Here, I'm aiming for a lighter, softer version of these colors. As with any coloring, I go back to the medium and to the light markers to blend the colors together. Next, I'm using reds. R20 is the lightest one I like to use when coloring something red. It is a very soft, pale color, and it is actually one that works well for blush. Next, I add R22, which is a slightly darker red, yet still very pale compared to the other reds. To deepen this color, I bring in R24. This is a very beautiful bright red and one I use very often. Here it is one of the darkest colors, but I also often use it as the lightest color for my coloring, followed by R27 and R39 or even R89 for very deep dark red. As for the pinks, I have several favorite combos. Here I'm using R10 as the lightest color, although R00 is also another pale pink that makes a beautiful base. Next, I use R11. This one is called Pink, and I find it to be just an overall pretty, somewhat muted pink color. I am finishing this color combo with R85 Rose Red color. This one is very rich, deep pink color. I also like to use RV34. It is a little bit more intense compared to the R85. You don't really see pink leaves in nature, but I wanted to include hints of pink on my project today, so I colored some leaves pink. Next, we are transitioning into yellow colors. I start with Y11. This is a pretty pale yellow color, and it makes a really nice base. It is somewhat muted, very soft, and very calm yellow. Next, I add Y08. It is acid yellow, and it is a very bright and vibrant color. And I top it off with Y17. This is called golden yellow, and it is exactly that, very rich, warm yellow color. When it comes to orange colors, this is not something I use very often. I probably only reach for my orange markers during fall as I'm making fall cards. And I like to use YR18 as the darkest orange. This is a very vibrant color. Next, I add YR15 as my medium orange. And then I like to use golden yellow, Y17, as the lightest orange. And it works really well with the other two colors. So there you have it, a quick run through some of my favorite Copic marker color combinations. There are a lot more, of course. Copic markers are fantastic because they work so well and blend so well together and allow you to color your heart out. If you wanted to, you could also blend different families together. I've introduced a little bit of yellow onto that large pink leaf. As leaves are rarely one color, they change the color gradually from green to yellow to orange and red and brown. I kept on working on this background until I had the entire background colored. Now, I did try out some other color combinations to have more color variation on my background, and I also tried mixing the color families a little bit more, especially on the larger leaves where I could do more blending. So here's what this background looks like once finished. I planned to cut a part of the background out, so I didn't color every last leaf, just a section that was large enough to cut a panel for my card. Before I did any cutting, I took the panel back to my MISTI stamping tool and I heat embossed the same image over the colored image in Simon's Antique Gold Embossing Powder. I did treat the paper with anti-static powder to keep my embossing nice and neat, and then I heat set the embossing powder in place to melt it. I love the look of this background and all of the colorful autumn leaves. I trimmed the panel to 3 3/4 by 5 inches, and I also heat embossed a sentiment that reads "All the Things," and this is from Cassie Zelski All the Things stamp set. I stamped the sentiment in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I heat embossed it in clear embossing powder. I also used a coordinating die and cut the sentiment out. I love that this sentiment is in the form of a speech bubble. Now, I wanted to add some interest to this background, so I decided to cut it diagonally and split it into 2 backgrounds. I used a scrap strip of white cardstock to help me visualize the cut, and then also to help me make the cut where I had originally planned it. I used little pieces of low-tack tape to tack that strip in place, and that worked as a guide for my cutting. That was very helpful. I used scrap cardstock and adhered 4 layers of scrap cardstock together to add dimension to this background. You can use foam adhesive or fun foam instead. I just have loads of scrap white cardstock, and I like the heft that the cardstock adds to the card compared to fun foam. Now, it does make it heavier, of course, so it will be more expensive for mailing, but the card feels nicer in the hand somehow, so I really don't mind. I used Pretty Pink Posh Sparkling Clear Sequins and then the Spellbinders Silver Mix Gems to embellish this card, and here's a look at the finished project. Now, as I was going through my stamp sets, I came across this Autumn Leaves set from Simon Says Stamp, and it features the same leaves as on the background that I used for the previous card. And I really wanted to use these individual leaves, so I decided I would make another bonus card for this video. I stamped the leaves in the same way, and I colored them using my Copic markers. I used reds for the berries, and here I added a darker R27 color to deepen the shadows a little bit further. For the leaves, I started with a lighter green YG00. I then used YG01 as a medium color and YG03 as the darkest color for a much lighter green leaves. Now, I didn't do heat embossing in gold this time. I did re-stamp the image outlines in VersaFine Onyx Black ink to have a darker black outline for these, and then I coated them with clear embossing powder. VersaFine ink takes a little bit longer to dry, so to help speed it along, I like to heat set it in clear embossing ink. And that also adds a little bit of shine to the stamping, so it's always an added bonus. I created a sentiment for this card using the same All the Thanks stamp set from Cassie Zielski, but this time I heat embossed the word blessings in white embossing powder onto black pearlescent cardstock and cut it out using a coordinating die. So here's what all of the pieces look like when clustered together. Now, to make a background for this card, I wanted to do something edgy and colorful, so I used Spellbinder's Color Block Slices die, and I cut it 8 times from Simon's 120-pound cardstock. I picked 8 colors of Distress Oxide inks to add color to each slice. Alternatively, you can cut the slices from colored cardstock, but I really wanted to use the colors of the oxide inks for this card. So I used Simon's new ink blending brushes and blended one color, a solid layer of color, onto each slice, and I colored it that way. I started with Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink. Next I used Peacock Feathers. Next one was Scattered Straw. Next one was a warmer yellow Mustard Seed. Next one was Dried Marigold. Next one, Spiced Marmalade. And the last one was Spun Sugar. I did not use the Abandoned Coral like I had first planned, and I actually ended up not using the one ink blended with the Scattered Straw Distress Oxide ink, so I actually had just 6 slices on the finished card. I placed the slices on top of a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white cardstock panel, leaving small white gaps in between the slices. You can cluster all of your slices together without any gaps, but this way the background ends up looking a little bit too intense. So I often like to space the slices out and leave little white gaps between the different colors or different sections. I created a jig for myself to help me space the slices out evenly. This is just a piece of scrap paper that I got using my paper trimmer, and this is about 1/8 of an inch wide. I adhered the first slice, and I made sure it was aligned with the top edge of my panel. Next, I used the jig to create spacing, and I adhered the next slice. I removed the jig, I repositioned it, and again, I adhered the next slice. I kept working on my background until I had all of the slices in place. Now, I intentionally cut my slices slightly smaller to save paper. The die will cut them bigger, longer if you want, and you can use these slices on different size cards, even on a slim line, but I knew I'd be trimming this panel down, so I didn't need the slices to be quite that long. With all of the slices adhered, I trimmed this panel to 3.5 to 4 3/4 inches, and I foam mounted the panel onto A2 white top folding card base. I stamped Count Your above the word Blessings in VersaFine Onyx Black ink directly onto one of the slices, and next I adhered the rest of the pieces in place. I cut extra blank Blessings layers from scrap white cardstock to add dimension to this die cut. I stuck them together and I adhered them using my Barely Art glue, and then used glue and foam adhesive squares to foam mount this die cut onto the card. Lastly, I added several silver gems from Spellbinders, and I used a white gel pen to add white dot highlights onto the red berries. So that's it for me for today. I hope you found this video useful and feel inspired to create. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.